The information shared in this episode is not intended to serve as a substitute for mental health services and is only intended to provide education and information to you, the listener. Thank you for listening to the Honeybee Podcast. Before I begin, a word of caution is necessary. This episode contains sensitive topics surrounding child sexual abuse, specifically intrafamilial sexual abuse, also known as incest. This subject matter may make some people feel uncomfortable. Therefore, discretion is advised. Here are 3 questions to kick off today's episode. Has your child disclosed being sexually abused? Was the perpetrator of the sexual abuse against your child a family member or someone who is considered to be a part of your family? And are you curious to know how to help your child recover from this sort of trauma? If you answered yes to 2 or more of those questions, or even 1, and are interested in learning more about intrafamilial sexual abuse, its effects on children, and ways to be of support to their healing, please stay tuned to this episode. Today's episode will focus on the experience of a child who has been sexually abused by a family member or friend to the family. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys have been or will be sexually abused by the age of 18. There is a possibility that the incidents of sexual abuse are higher. However, this is difficult to determine due to the tendency of underreporting. Now, underreporting occurs due to the fear that the child may have, as well as other factors, that block disclosing the abuse. To quickly define sexual abuse, that is when someone has sexual contact with a child, engages in sexual activities with that child, as well as exposing the child to obscene images like pornography or perhaps taking inappropriate photos or videos of the youth. Over half of all children who are sexually abused are victimized by a parent or other relative. Intrafamilial sexual abuse is far more prevalent than many people know. Sexual abuse that happens within a family unit completed by an adult or a person much older than the child can destroy that kid's sense of safety around older people, as well as people who they thought could be trusted and would help keep them safe. Sexual abuse is anytime someone is in the position of power, whether that power is in the form of physical differences, emotional differences, or psychological, and it forces or intimidates a child to do something sexual that is age inappropriate, uncomfortable, or against that young person's will. While this subject matter is understandably uncomfortable to many, it is significant and meaningful to discuss in order to help healing, prevention, and building awareness about this global issue. Intrafamilial sexual abuse, or incest, occurs in many families. This is regardless of their race, their ethnicity, the family's economic or social status, or their religion. So, learning the warning signs of incest and sexual abuse in general is the first step in helping a child who is at risk of being harmed. So for children, after disclosing sexual abuse by a family member, their fear amplifies about how their disclosure will affect the family. They may wonder, if I share this, how will it change everyone's life? And will things get worse? They wonder if their family will be mad at them. They are afraid that no one will believe them. They may wonder if they can still be loved by their family and the people who are important to them. In many instances, the youth may be concerned about whether that perpetrator will hurt them or their family. This is especially so if the person threatened to do physical harm to the family if the youth disclosed the trauma. The child may be worried about whether the abuse will happen again and whether it will be worse the next time because of their disclosure. The fear experienced by the child is endless. Self-doubt can become a subsequent experience to having been sexually abused on top of fear. For girls who are more likely to disclose having been sexually abused, there tends to be this sense that they are damaged because the incest occurred. They may worry that they will never have healthy, meaningful, romantic, or sexual relationships with others as they get older. And as they progress down the developmental stage in life, these sorts of questions may come up for them. For boys, it's my thinking that sexual abuse is not disclosed or acknowledged as frequently as their female counterpart due to the social stigma that's associated with incest or sexual abuse within the gender. If a boy has been sexually abused by an adult male or a male child who is older than the youth, and they may question their sexual orientation and preference. This is especially so if the child experienced sexual arousal or pleasure during the traumatic experience. What is important for me to highlight is that the body is designed to react to touch or to stimulation. This is especially true for genitalia, which will respond to touch whether it is consensual or forced. Here is the last piece on self-doubt. In many instances, a child will carry the responsibility of the abuse. This self-blame can be amplified, especially if there were moments when, usually during the grooming process, the child found interacting with the perpetrator pleasant or fun. This is complex because the perpetrator usually grooms a child by making their sexually inappropriate behaviors into a game of sorts. When abusive behaviors are presented as play, the child's ability to distinguish what's okay and not okay is compromised. So as a result, the child may enjoy the interactions occurring during the grooming process and may not object to the further activities that are associated with sexual abuse, as they are not aware that the behavior is not okay. No matter how a child responds to the abuse, it is absolutely never, ever, 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 never, ever, ever, ever the kid's fault, ever, no matter what, not ever. So the disclosure has been made. People have found out that the youth was a victim of intrafamilial sexual abuse. And understandably, various members of the family who are aware of this disclosure have different reactions. And sometimes when the fallout happens, the kid may consider taking their disclosure back to try and make everything okay. They may begin to question whether what they shared in their disclosure was actually a problem. Was it really worth telling? They will question whether the things that they identified as terrifying or disgusting or scary, if those things were actually as severe as they were. Now, parents, it's important to note that if a child takes back their disclosure, which is also known as recanting, it does not mean that the kid made the story up. It is more likely that the kid is feeling pressure to recant because of the effects that their disclosure had on the family as a whole. This is amplified even more so when there is limited family support after the disclosure for the victim. It is overwhelming and terrifying for many children, for people in general, to acknowledge having been sexually abused, even more so when the perpetrator is a family member. An essential piece that will help the child feel a sense of safety comes from the support of their non-offending parent or parents, as well as their non-offending family members. Most children who have experienced incest are able to go on to have typical, healthy, and appropriate relationships with others. And it will take a significant amount of support, effort, and time, coupled with receiving treatment from a licensed mental health professional. These things can help the kid's healing process tremendously. I would like to thank the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network for the following items that are helpful in identifying the signs that an adult may be sexually abusing a child that you know and love. Here are some behavioral examples. This adult does not respect the boundaries of others and does not listen when someone tells them no, especially when it relates to interpersonal boundaries, relationship boundaries, touch, things of that nature. This adult engages in touching that the child or the kid's parents have identified as unwanted or inappropriate. This adult tries to be the kid's friend rather than filling an adult role in the kid's life. This adult does not seem to have age-appropriate relationships of their own. This adult spends time alone with children outside of their role and makes up excuses to be alone with the child. This adult expresses unusual interest in the child's sexual development, such as commenting on their sexual characteristics or sexualizing normal behaviors that the child is showing. And finally, this adult gives a child gifts without occasion or reason. These are just a few items to be mindful of, and by no means is an exhaustive list of things to be mindful of. Rain also provided context on the physical, behavioral, and emotional cues that a child typically exhibits after having been sexually abused, and they are signs of trauma to the genital area, such as unexplained bleeding, bruising, or blood on the sheets, is an example of a physical warning sign. Behavioral signs include the kid expressing sexual behaviors that are inappropriate for that kid's age, also bedwetting or soiling the bed, as well as thumb sucking. This is especially true if the child has already outgrown those behaviors. If the child expresses that they do not want to be left alone with certain people or that they're afraid to be away from their primary caregivers when that was not an issue, that is something to be mindful of. And finally, you may notice that the child tries to avoid removing their clothing to change or bathe. Some emotional signs include excessive talk about or knowledge of sexual topics where there had been none before, and nightmares or fear of being alone at night, as well as general worry or fearfulness out of the blue occurring more often than not. So if you're noticing a notable change to your kid's behavior, their fear of being independent from you, their fear of sleeping, their fear of being around a specific person, things of that nature, I invite you to be mindful of those things and receive support from a mental health professional or pediatrician to help with teasing out whether these signs are indicative for your child that they have been a victim to intrafamilial sexual abuse. So, it is a sad and sobering reality that children are sexually abused across the globe. Compounding this heartbreaking realization is the fact that sexual abuse occurs against a child by a parent or family member who is inherently responsible for keeping the kid safe from hurt, harm, or danger. 2 out of 3 adults admitted to being sexually abused as children and identified that they never disclosed their trauma due to fear. By discussing this matter, I hope there is creation of conversation, a conversation with your child or any child that you care about regarding appropriate and inappropriate touch from others. a conversation between you and a friend or a family member about the signs and signals that a child exhibits when they have been sexually abused. In general, a conversation about incest, I think, would be beneficial to have. With awareness and discussion, there is a possibility to enhance prevention to keep the children that we know and love safe from experiencing intrafamilial sexual abuse and sexual abuse in general. Please tune in to next week's episode that will focus on how parents can attend to their own healing and enhance their ability to manage their complex reactions to their kids' disclosure of intrafamilial sexual abuse. Thank you so much for listening to the Honeybee Podcast. Until next time, peace.